41,000 feet over central Canada, a brand new Boeing 767 is cruising smoothly toward Edmonton. The passengers on board are enjoying a beautiful summer evening. Then, a warning. Low fuel pressure, left side. The captain frowns. Minutes later, another warning, right side this time. Something's very wrong. The left engine quits, then the right. Both engines dead at 35,000 feet, still 65 miles from the airport. Every display in the state-of-the-art cockpit goes black. The only sound? Silence. Terrifying silence. The captain is now flying a 150-ton metal glider with no engines, no power, and barely any instruments. 69 souls behind him, some of them crying, some of them writing goodbye notes to their families. The air traffic control loses the aircraft on radar. They can't see where it is. The captain decides for an emergency landing on the closest runway they could find. But what he doesn't know is that the runway he's heading for is not active anymore. It had been converted into a racetrack, and at this exact moment, on that runway, families are barbecuing, kids are bicycling. The pilots don't know about it, and neither does the air traffic control. This is the story of Air Canada Flight 143.
I am Captain Jack Mercer. What you're going to watch now is the story from the perspective of a pilot who has lived and seen a lot in 25 years of experience. Welcome aboard. Okay, here we go. Today is July 23rd, 1983, around 7 p.m. An Air Canada Boeing 767 pushes back from the gate at Ottawa International Airport in Canada, beginning its cross-country journey to Edmonton, Alberta. On board are 61 passengers, 2 pilots, and 6 flight attendants, 69 souls total. Who's in command? It's Captain Robert Pearson, 48 years old. He's a senior pilot with an impressive 26 years of experience and over 15,000 hours of total flight time. His logbook includes everything from Douglas DC-3s and DC-8s to Boeing 727s. But this 767? That's relatively new territory for him, you know? Sitting in the right seat is First Officer Maurice Kindall, 36 years old, a Canadian Air Force veteran with more than 7,000 hours of flying experience. He knows this aircraft a bit better than Pearson, but they're both still learning to be true. Now, let's talk about the aircraft. The Boeing 767-200 is brand new to Air Canada's fleet. This particular aircraft is only 4 months old, one of just 4 767s the airline operates. It's a technological marvel compared to the older generation of aircraft. Advanced cockpit displays, computerized systems, so much automation that the traditional flight engineer position has been eliminated entirely. It's a 2-pilot cockpit now. But I want to mention another guy in this story, and soon you will know why. His name is Rick Dion, and I could not find his exact age at that time, but I found out that he's mid-30s. He is among the passengers, an Air Canada maintenance engineer, traveling with his wife Pearl and their 4-year-old son Chris. They're heading to Edmonton for a 2-week vacation. Rick boards and goes to the cockpit, not only to see his friend Captain Pearson, but specially to see the new technology in the 767 cockpit. All right, the weather forecast looks perfect. Clear skies, good visibility, no significant issues along the route. The flight will take them over northern Ontario, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan before reaching Alberta. Ottawa is a relatively small airport, especially for a wide-body giant like the 767. So the aircraft lines up on the runway within minutes. Engines spool up, the pilots advance the throttles. The 767 accelerates down the runway and lifts off smoothly, turning northwest toward Edmonton. Everything seems routine. Just another day at work, right? Well, my friend, let me tell you that this flight is about to become anything but routine. And the chain of events that leads to disaster actually began the day before, hundreds of miles away. Keep watching. Let me take you back to July 22nd, 1983, the day before this flight, okay? The aircraft is in Edmonton, Canada, undergoing a routine maintenance inspection. A technician notices something wrong. The fuel quantity indicating system, the FQIS, has failed. The fuel gauges in the cockpit have gone blank. Now, the 767's fuel system has 2 separate channels feeding information to those gauges. If both channels are working and agree with each other, the gauges display normally. But if one channel fails, or if they disagree, the entire system blanks out as a safety feature. Understand? So, the technician identifies that the second channel is faulty, so he pulls the circuit breaker for that channel, isolating it. When he does this, the fuel gauges come back to life, now receiving information from only the working channel. Problem solved? Not quite, my friend. From a pilot perspective, aircraft systems require redundancy. You can't have a single critical system relying on just one source of information. So Air Canada's minimum equipment list, the MEL, states that if one fuel processor channel is inoperative, the aircraft can still fly, but maintenance must perform something called a drip check before every departure. And a drip check is exactly what it sounds like. Inside each fuel tank are measuring sticks, drip sticks, connected to floats. A technician pulls them out and reads how many centimeters of fuel are in the tank at that location. Then he consults reference tables from Boeing to convert those centimeter readings into volume, liters, or gallons. Finally, because fuel gauges measure fuel by weight, not volume, he must convert that volume into weight using a conversion factor. Got all that? I know, it's complicated, and it's about to get worse. Here's where things get messy. In the early 1980s, Canada was transitioning from the imperial system to the metric system. This transition was causing confusion everywhere. Aviation, transportation, manufacturing. It was a costly mess. Air Canada had requested that Boeing equip its new 767s with fuel gauges that display weight in kilograms instead of pounds. Every other aircraft in the Air Canada fleet measured fuel in pounds. The 767 was different.
And here's the critical detail. Converting liters to pounds requires a conversion factor of 1.77. But converting liters to kilograms requires a conversion factor of 0.803, a completely different number. Most Air Canada personnel didn't know this. The change was communicated, there was some training material, but in practice, people were still confused. So the aircraft flies from Edmonton to Montreal with a stop in Ottawa. The drip checks are performed correctly, the fuel gauges are working, everything seems fine. The plane lands in Montreal around 4 p.m., where it's scheduled for a crew change. Captain Pearson arrives and meets the outgoing crew in the parking lot. They discuss the aircraft's condition. The outgoing captain mentions the fuel gauge issue and tells Pearson that a drip check procedure is required. But pay attention here. A critical miscommunication occurs. Captain Pearson believes, incorrectly, that the fuel gauges are completely blank and inoperative. He thinks the aircraft flew to Montreal without working fuel gauges. Understand? Meanwhile, back at the aircraft, another maintenance technician arrives to perform the drip check before the return flight. While waiting for the fuel truck, he decides to troubleshoot the faulty FQIS himself. He pushes the circuit breaker back in, the opposite of what the previous technician did, and runs a diagnostic test. This activates the faulty channel. The fuel gauges go blank again. He can't fix it, and then he gets distracted by the fuel truck arriving. He forgets to pull the circuit breaker back out. When Captain Pearson enters the cockpit, what does he see? Blank fuel gauges. Exactly what he was expecting based on his misunderstanding. His confirmation bias kicks in. Everything looks the way he thought it would. He sees the circuit breaker with a yellow collar on it, a tag indicating it's been pulled, but in reality, it's been pushed back in. He assumes it's pulled because that's what he expects to see. Pearson questions whether it's legal to fly without working fuel gauges. A maintenance worker reassures him that Air Canada's maintenance control has approved it. This isn't true. No such approval was given, but Pearson believes it. He thinks the aircraft already flew in this condition earlier, so it must be okay.
Now comes the fuel calculation. According to the flight plan, the aircraft needs at least 22,300 kilograms of fuel to reach Edmonton safely, including reserves. The drip check shows approximately 7,700 liters currently on board. Captain Pearson, First Officer Quintal, the maintenance technician, and the fueler all gather to figure out how much fuel to add. None of them have been properly trained to perform these calculations. The responsibility for fuel calculations used to belong to the flight engineer, but that position no longer exists on the 767. After a brief discussion, they agreed to use the conversion factor they're familiar with, 1.77, the one used for pounds on every other Air Canada aircraft. They multiply 7,700 liters by 1.77 and get 13,600. They assume this is kilograms. It's actually pounds. They subtract this from the required 22,300 kilograms. 22,300 minus 13,600 equals 8,700 kilograms needed. They divide the 8,700 by 1.77 to convert back to liters. 4,900 liters. The fueler rounds up to 5,000 liters. Better safe than sorry, right? And loads that amount onto the aircraft. But here's what they should have done, my friend. They should have multiplied 7,700 liters by 0.8 to get 6,160 kilograms currently on board. Subtract that from the 22,300 kilograms required. 16,140 kilograms needed. Convert that back to liters, 20,175 liters. So they should have loaded more than 20,000 liters and not 5,000 liters. By using the wrong conversion factor, they've loaded exactly half the fuel they need for the flight. I mean, this is a 4-hour journey and they've got 2 hours of fuel on board. But because the fuel gauges are blank, nobody realizes the mistake. And because they all use the same wrong calculation, the numbers seem to match up perfectly. Okay, the aircraft boards its passengers and departs Montreal for Ottawa, a 40-minute hop. No problems. There's enough fuel for that short leg. In Ottawa, maintenance performs another drip check before the flight to Edmonton. They use the same wrong conversion factor, the same mistake, you see. The numbers still seem to match. Everything looks fine. Captain Pearson manually inputs the incorrect fuel quantity into the flight management system. Without the FQIS working, the computer can't calculate the aircraft's actual range or warn the pilots that they don't have enough fuel. It's 7 p.m. and Flight 143 departs Montreal for Edmonton. The crew believes they have plenty of fuel. In reality, they're about to run dry halfway there. The 767 climbs smoothly to its cruise altitude of 41,000 feet. At this altitude, they're riding a strong tailwind. The flight is smooth, the weather is perfect. Captain Pearson turns to First Officer Quintal with a smile. For once, he says, everything is working properly. Rick Dion, remember, the maintenance engineer? He comes up to the cockpit to see the new technology. Captain Pearson welcomes him in. They chat about the aircraft, the advanced displays, how different everything is from the older planes. It's a friendly, relaxed atmosphere. The flight continues normally for about an hour. They're somewhere near the Ontario-Manitoba border, cruising along at 41,000 feet. Passengers are finishing their dinners. The cabin crew is collecting trays. Everything is routine. Now, it's around 8 p.m. and a warning light illuminates. Low fuel pressure, left fuel pump. Pearson and Quintal exchange glances. That's odd. The warning means the engine isn't receiving fuel at an adequate rate. Could be a pump failure. Could be something else. They're not overly concerned yet, but they're paying attention, you know? That moment when something doesn't feel quite right, but you're not sure what it is yet. So, a few minutes later, another warning. Low fuel pressure, right fuel pump. Yes, now they're worried. 2 fuel pumps failing on a brand new airplane? That doesn't make sense. Rick Dion, still in the cockpit, knows something about fuel systems. He mentions that when a tank is running low, the pump can start flashing periodically as it tries to reprime. Could they be running out of fuel? No, that's impossible. The flight management computer shows they have plenty. They did 3 separate fuel checks that all matched the flight plan. The numbers are good. But the warnings keep coming. More fuel pumps, more low-pressure alerts. Captain Pearson makes a decision. Let's head for Winnipeg. He's not taking any chances. Winnipeg is about 120 miles away, the nearest major airport with full maintenance facilities. If there's a fuel problem, they need to get on the ground. I think this is exactly the right call, you know? When you don't understand what's happening, you land as soon as possible. So, Captain Pearson contacts Winnipeg Center. We have a problem, requesting direct Winnipeg. The controller, Ron Hewitt, has 20 years of experience. He hears the calm but serious tone in Pearson's voice. Roger, cleared direct Winnipeg. Descend at your discretion. Hewitt doesn't ask questions. He clears the airspace. Get the guy what he wants. The warnings are spreading. More fuel pumps losing pressure. The pilots run through checklists, trying to identify the problem. Nothing makes sense. First Officer Quintal instructs the cabin crew to prepare for an emergency landing in Winnipeg. The flight attendants spring into action, briefing passengers, preparing the cabin. In the passenger section, people are starting to realize something's wrong. The crew's demeanor has changed. There's urgency now. Then, the left engine quits. just stops. The power drops off. The sound changes. "Okay," Pearson says calmly, "we've lost the left engine. Checklist. Single engine landing." He's trained for this. Every pilot trains for engine failures. It's serious, but manageable, because a 767 can fly and land on one engine without major issues. But in the back of his mind, a terrible thought is forming. If they're actually running out of fuel, and the evidence is mounting, then the right engine is going to quit too. Minutes later, the right engine follows. The power drops, the sound changes, and then silence. Both engines dead. At 26,500 feet above the ground, still 75 miles from Winnipeg, Captain Robert Pearson is now flying a 150-ton glider with 69 people on board. So when both engines quit, the generators stop producing electrical power. Every display in the state-of-the-art cockpit goes dark. The colorful screens, the engine instruments, the flight displays, all black. Pearson immediately declares a mayday. "We just lost both engines." At Winnipeg Center, Controller Ron Hewitt hears those words and thinks, "I'm talking to a dead man." He's seen the statistics. Nobody survives a dual-engine failure at altitude. The aircraft will be completely uncontrollable. It's going to spin in. Everyone on board is going to die.
But modern airliners have one last trick up their sleeve. Automatically, the ram air turbine deploys, a small propeller that drops from the belly of the fuselage. The sloop stream turns it, and it generates just enough hydraulic pressure to power the most essential systems. A standby artificial horizon comes to life, an altimeter, an airspeed indicator, a magnetic compass. That's it. That's all they have. No navigation displays, no vertical speed indicator, no transponder. The aircraft has essentially become a 1960s-era plane with basic instruments. So Pearson asks for vectors to the closest available runway. But there's a problem. At Winnipeg Center, Flight 143 has vanished from the radar screen. The transponder, which broadcasts the aircraft's position and altitude, requires electrical power. It's not on the list of items powered by the ram air turbine. The controllers switch to primary radar, old-fashioned reflective radar that doesn't need a transponder. It takes time. The plane is somewhere out there falling toward the Earth, and they don't know exactly where. "I've got him!" a controller finally shouts. 65 miles from Winnipeg, 45 miles from Gimli. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, after running the numbers again, the first officer comes to a chilling realization. At 8,500 feet, they are still 30 miles from Winnipeg, but with the glide they have left, they can only make about 20 miles. In other words, they'd fall short by a full 10 miles, not enough to reach the airport. After a quick chat with air traffic control, both pilots agreed on another plan. Just 12 miles to their right, there is an old Royal Canadian Air Force base with a runway long enough for their Boeing 767. The place is called Gimli, a small town tucked in the heart of Manitoba. Their flight manuals don't have much about that field. No detailed charts, no runway data. But luckily, First Officer Quintal knew Gimli because he'd actually served there during his Air Force days years before. But pay attention here. There is one big problem nobody knew. Not the crew, not even Winnipeg controllers. The runway they are heading for, runway 32 left, wasn't an active runway anymore. It had been converted into a racetrack. Yes, complete with a drag strip and a few racing loops on it. To make it worse, exactly today, July 23, 1983, the Winnipeg Sports Car Club is hosting a family day event. Hundreds of people have come out for a weekend of racing, go-karting, and barbecues. Right beside the old runway, families and kids have pitched tents and campers, completely unaware that a powerless airliner is silently gliding toward them.
In the aircraft cabin, the flight attendants are doing an incredible job keeping passengers calm. They're explaining the situation, giving clear instructions, and answering questions, but the reality is sinking in for everyone on board. Parents are hugging their children. Some passengers are writing notes to loved ones, final messages, wills, goodbyes. Rick Dion goes back to check on his wife Pearl and their 4-year-old son Chris. Then he returns to the cockpit. The pilots don't need him up there, but he wants to see what's happening, right? 5 miles out, they finally have the field in sight. a long runway stretching across the flat Manitoba landscape. Perfect. But there's a problem. They're too high. Way too high. Normally, an aircraft descends along a 3-degree glide path to the runway. Nice and gradual. But Flight 143 is much higher than that. If Pearson tries to glide down at a normal angle, he'll overshoot the runway completely. If he descends steeply, the aircraft will gain too much speed. Without flaps or speed brakes, which require full hydraulic power, he won't be able to slow down. He'll hit the runway too fast and run off the end. What are we going to do? Quintal asks. Pearson considers a 360-degree turn to lose altitude, but they're only about 3,000 feet above the ground and descending at 2,500 feet per minute. They don't have enough altitude. They'd hit the ground before completing the turn. Then, Captain Pearson has a crazy idea. He says, I guess I'll just slip it. Let me explain why it's a crazy idea. He is talking about a forward slip. You cross the controls, turn the ailerons one way and the rudder the other way, forcing the aircraft into a sideways descent. It creates massive drag, allowing you to drop quickly without gaining speed. This is a maneuver used by glider pilots in small aircraft, and Captain Pearson is very familiar with the maneuver because he is a hobbyist glider pilot. But the maneuver is practically unheard of in large commercial jets like a Boeing 767. It's very risky because the turbulence from the fuselage can affect the engines, But I think that at this point, he cannot find another option, so he decided to take the risk. So, Pearson says, here we go. He pushes the left rudder and turns the yoke right. The aircraft banks hard to the left while the nose points right. The 767 begins sliding sideways through the air, falling rapidly.
In the cabin, passengers see the wings tilt to nearly 90 degrees. Those on the right side see nothing but blue sky. Those on the left are looking almost straight down at the ground. They can see a golf course below. They can see individual golfers. They can almost make out what clubs they're using. This is it, they think. These are our final moments. The wind howls louder. The aircraft shakes violently. The added drag from flying sideways is enormous. Down on the runway, people are having fun. Kids running around, playing with their soccer balls and bicycles. With the plane's engine shuttered down, the aircraft is in total silence, and nobody on the ground can hear the airplane coming their way. Inside the cockpit, Pearson maintains the slip until the last possible moment. Then, just before reaching the runway, he yanks the controls hard in the opposite direction, straightening the aircraft. But the slip has created another problem. The ram air turbine, which was already barely producing enough power, slowed down during the sideways flight. The hydraulic pressure has dropped even further. The flight controls are heavy, sluggish. Then, finally, people see a massive airliner, wings tilted nearly vertical, descending toward them. People start running, scattering in all directions to try to escape. Pearson wrestles with the yoke. Come on! Come on! The aircraft straightens. The main wheels are about to touch down. At this exact moment, Quintal sees the racetrack ahead, the crowds, the barriers, the chaos. Captain, he says. Too late. The captain is committed to land right now. So the main gear touches down 800 feet past the threshold. Pearson slams on the brakes. The wheels lock. 2 tires blow out immediately, loud bangs that sent panic through the cabin. The nose gear, which was never locked during the gravity drop, collapses under the weight. The nose slams into the runway with a massive scraping sound, terrifying the passengers even more. The collapsed nose gear is grinding against the pavement, creating enormous friction. It's acting as a brake, a very effective one. Pearson uses differential braking, varying pressure on the left and right wheels to steer as best he can. But when they start to believe that the nightmare is going to end soon, they see something at the end of the runway. 2 boys on their bicycles are ahead. In the same moment, the boys also see the aircraft coming in their direction, extremely fast. They're frozen in terror for a moment. The captain is in terror too. He cannot take the airplane off to the side because it is where the families are camping. But he cannot take the airplane into the 2 boys either. So he understands that he desperately needs to stop the plane. While he's trying hard to stop the plane, the 2 kids turn their bicycles to the opposite side of the runway and run as fast as they can, trying to outrun the plane. The captain swerves slightly, giving them room to escape. The kids pedal frantically. The aircraft plows into a guardrail installed down the middle of the runway, another lucky break that slows them down even more. Smoke,
grinding metal, the smell of burning rubber and overheated brakes, and then silence. Flight 143 comes to a complete stop less than 1,000 feet from the campground full of spectators. 17 minutes after running out of fuel, Captain Pearson landed a Boeing 767 with no engines and saved every single person on board. For a moment, nobody moves. Then someone in the cabin yells, "Yahoo!" Applause erupts. People are crying, laughing, hugging each other. But thick smoke is filling the cabin. Friction from the nose grinding on the runway has ignited insulation between the inner and outer skins of the fuselage. The flight attendants don't take chances. Evacuate, evacuate, evacuate! The doors open, slides deploy. But because the nose is on the ground, the rear slides are dangerously steep, almost vertical. 10 people suffer minor injuries sliding down, but everyone gets off the aircraft safely.
On the ground, members of the sports car club grab fire extinguishers and run toward the plane. Within minutes, they put out the small fire. All 61 passengers, all 8 crew members, not a single fatality, not a single serious injury. Captain Pearson has done what nobody thought possible. He glided a 767 for more than 26,000 feet and landed safely on a decommissioned runway full of people. The Gimli Glider has made aviation history, my friend, and Captain Pearson now is a hero. So, today I'm not going to point out what went wrong in this story. I think you already know, right? But instead, I want to talk about what went right, because that's equally important. Captain Pearson's decision-making during the emergency was exemplary, I could say. When he didn't understand the fuel pressure warnings, he immediately diverted to the nearest suitable airport. He declared a mayday as soon as both engines failed. He chose Gimli over Winnipeg when calculations showed they couldn't make Winnipeg. He used his glider experience to execute a forward slip, a highly unconventional maneuver that probably saved everyone's lives that day, right? How about the first officer Quintals? Well, his calculations were critical. Without a vertical speed indicator, he manually calculated their glide ratio and determined they couldn't reach Winnipeg. He also knew Gimli from his military service, which made the decision to land there possible. The flight attendants deserve enormous credit, too. They kept passengers calm during a terrifying situation. They executed a perfect evacuation. Not a single serious injury during the emergency exit. I mean, such good teamwork. Do you agree? The ram air turbine worked exactly as designed, giving the pilots just enough control to fly the aircraft. Without it, they would have been completely powerless. And let's not forget luck. Right? The collapsed nose gear that acted as a brake, the guardrail that slowed them down, the fact that it was late afternoon and most of the racing was done so fewer people were on the runway, even the 2 boys on bicycles who managed to get out of the way. So, the investigation board held Captain Pearson accountable for departing with inoperative fuel gauges. But they assigned most of the responsibility to Air Canada for failing to properly manage the introduction of the 767 fleet and failing to clearly define fuel calculation procedures after eliminating the flight engineer position. The aircraft itself was repaired and returned to service just 2 days after the incident. It continued flying for Air Canada until its retirement in 2008, 25 more years of service. It was eventually flown out to the desert and scrapped. Captain Pearson and First Officer Quintal both continued their careers with Air Canada. Initially, Pearson was demoted to First Officer for 6 months as punishment for departing with inoperative fuel gauges. Quintal was suspended for 2 weeks, but after appeals, both were reinstated to their positions. In 1985, both pilots were awarded the Federation Aeronautic International Diploma for Outstanding Airmanship, the first time this prestigious award was ever given. They were considered heroes. And when the Gimli Glider was finally retired in 2008, both Pearson and Quintal, who had since been promoted to captain, joined the retirement flight as honored guests. Now tell me, was this a good story or not, my friend? Well, if you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed telling it, please hit that like button. Are you subscribed to my channel? Hope so. You don't want to miss my next episode, right? Right. I am Captain Jack Mercer. See ya on the next flight.